Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. After yesterday's message, you're probably needing a little break from me. But I want to follow it up just a little concerning all this face mask wearing. You know, when word of COVID-19 started trickling out earlier in this year, I began to consume the news with the same concern I think most of us experienced when we heard of the new threat. Periodically, the concern was soothed by stories of communities coming together to support the most vulnerable among us. In recent days, however, I've watched in disappointment in our collective trauma and fatigue and how it's devolved into fighting about whether we should wear face covering for the protection of others and ourselves. Barring certain medical conditions which preclude wearing a mask, the objections to wearing masks are ideological and emotional. The word sheep is getting thrown around lately as an insult to those of us who choose to cover our faces out of concern and respect for those around us. I have also seen and heard Christian brothers and sisters proclaim that this whole mask wearing thing is an infringement, on our personal liberty. And I do believe we should approach any potential infringement on freedom with caution and skepticism. But if I'm labeled a sheep for caring for the welfare of my neighbor, I'll consider it a badge of honor, for after all, am I not a follower of the Good Shepherd? The face mask wearing debate among Christ followers amid a devastating global pandemic, and yes, it is devastating, yes, it is global, and yes, it is pandemic, that I need to even emphasize that is painful. But it all demands that we think deeply about what outward signs signify about our inward spiritual grace. As human beings, one of the ways we express ourselves, right, is through our attire. I mean, employers expect certain appropriate clothing for your places of business, whether it's a suit and tie, or whether it's an apron, whether it's a uniform, coveralls, scrubs. I mean, even gang members show their affiliation by the clothing they wear. We communicate our identities with our haircuts, our piercings, our tattoos. We express ourselves with our appearance. And in turn, we make judgments of others based upon their appearance. We just do. I can't help but notice the psychological roots of the aversion to wearing a mask. I know for a number of people, it's just they don't want to appear weak. Our Lord never had that fear. Why should we? Hiding one's face, though, immediately creates some suspicion, right? In others. With a mask on, you really can't see the person's facial expressions, and in order to assess whether they are friend or foe, we can't even assess their identity in many cases. I mean, that's why we wear masks on Halloween, right? No. To change our perceived identity for that night. when we combine that psychological discomfort with our cultural traditions of face covering, we encounter even more hurdles to accepting wearing a mask. In American culture, we often associate wearing a mask with people who wish to do us harm. When I think of face coverings, my mind immediately jumps to that bank robber in those old westerns that I still watch occasionally. I think of ski masks that kidnappers wear in movies or in, on TV shows. And I think of the racist reactions many people have to the face coverings worn by Muslim women. In every culture, people adorn themselves with religious symbols to signal to others their devotion to their faith traditions, right? I mean, the Muslim head covering is certainly one of many, many examples. In Christianity, some ministers wear clerical robes and stoles. Habits are worn in monastic orders. Cross necklaces, head coverings, in some denominations, t-shirts with religious themes, yes, and even tattoos. All of these can be, and often are, spiritual symbols, right? That can both signify and deepen our faith. In these extraordinary days, I've come to view wearing a protective mask while in public as a spiritual practice. Here are some ways this practice is deepening my faith. Mask wearing is an exercise in the spiritual practice of loving one's neighbor. I wear my mask as a sign of my love and my care for others, especially those who are most at risk. Jesus tells us that when we care for the least of these, we are really serving Him. I believe that by caring for the most vulnerable among us, I'm following Jesus' example. Wearing a mask is increasing my understanding of humility. It's humbling to wear a protective mask, especially in communities where doing so is unpopular or even ridiculed. Some people have looked at me with questions in their eyes or make comments that imply that somehow I am overreacting. I remember that no matter how much scorn I may bear or experience, the Christ I followed endured so much more. Listening comes along with humility. No matter how comfortable the mask may be, talking through a mask is difficult. And, I feel the cloth kind of suck into my mouth when I inhale, and I'm aware of the muffled sound of my voice as I attempt to communicate. So, just to warn you, when we do gather together physically, hopefully on June 7th, when I preach, I will not be having the mask cover my mouth and nose in order to communicate the good news as clearly as possible. So I will be encouraging people to sit at least the third pew back. Because when I talk, I spray sometimes. Just who I am, whatever. But we want to be safe, but I also want to communicate. So if you're uncomfortable with that, please do not come. I find when I wear my mask, I find myself speaking less. So you probably want me to put it on when I'm preaching, right? Yeah. But I find myself speaking less and listening more when my face is covered. I am resolved to listen now more consciously and intentionally whenever I'm wearing my mask. And not surprisingly, this spiritual practice has also extended into my non-mask wearing times of listening more intently. You know, I've had several handmade cloth masks given to me. When I wear them, I remember I am loved. I remember how thankful I am for those people in my life. I think about the effort they put into making the mask, choosing the color for me, making sure it fits me, you know, choosing the right weight of fabric for adequate protection. A lot of thought goes into it, and I appreciate that concern and that love. So when I wear a mask made by a beloved person in my life or church member, I remember their care and love, and that's a beautiful thing. At this time of intense isolation for some people still, wearing my mask reminds me that I'm not alone and that I'm enveloped in love. Above all, wearing a mask reminds me that my identity is found in my relationship with God. When I wear a mask, my features are hidden and my facial expressions are sometimes impossible to decipher, and it's sometimes hard to feel understood when you are aware that those around you cannot recognize your face or understand your emotions. When other people are not wearing a mask, it can make your visible difference of wearing a mask uncomfortably obvious. When I wear my mask, my intention is to show that I am a Christ follower who cares for my neighbor above myself. Whether or not other people understand that is less important than whether God understands my heart. So I'm at peace with it. I do believe, dear friends, you can find that choosing to wear a mask, that it can be a spiritual practice, and it can deepen your faith and increase your commitment to your neighbor in this time of the pandemic. Yes, I hope and pray for that day to come when these masks are no longer needed, no longer necessary. But I also hope that the lessons God can teach us through this practice can remain an integral part of our lives of faith. Please take care. Be safe. And God bless you. Always. Always.